Okay, welcome back to a continuation of the Principles of Macroeconomics course, a lecture course that has been moved online by the coronavirus pandemic. We are now giving lectures on the topic of aggregate supply, aggregate demand, and we've covered aggregate demand in the last couple topics. And today we're going to cover aggregate supply. So let's go to it. Let's get into our course and Principles of Macroeconomics. Let's go to the lecture topics and open that up in another tab. Here it is. So we're at number 23, aggregate supply, short and long run. We need to draw a graph of the short run aggregate supply curve and explain why it is upward sloping. And then we need to, on the same graph, draw a long run aggregate supply. This is a short run. And explain why it is vertical. And finally, we need to explain what the intersection of the short run and long run aggregate supply curves indicates in this model of the macroeconomy. And right after we do 24, we will have put together our little model of aggregate supply, aggregate demand, short run aggregate supply, long run aggregate supply. And we'll start applying it first to explain some causes of recession. We will apply it to what's happening right now and what perhaps to expect. We'll see what happens and what I'm talking about. Should anyone listen to this in the future years, and I'm not re-recorded, is the sharp drop in employment and output that has occurred with the stay-at-home, shelter-in-place response to the spread of the pandemic of the Corona-19 virus. Okay, so let's get busy. Hopefully we can get at least through 25 in a couple lectures. All right, let's do 23 now. And let's go back to the our course and call up the PowerPoints. Get those going. And we'll go down to 23. Here's the recordings of my previous lectures. Well, let's see, I'm just curious. So 33 minutes, almost 34 for that first one, 25, almost 26, almost 40 minutes for topic 20, and almost 40 minutes again for topic 21, but only 23 minutes for topic 22. And now we're here, 23. Let's open that in a new link. And I've got it open already. Here it is. So I do want to keep this column open because if I do a spreadsheet, I can't write on it. And I do want to draw on it. So here we go. Now we're doing the short run aggregate supply curve. And this is important, short run, because we'll want to do the long run later. In general, aggregate supply is a quantity supplied of all goods and services at different price levels, ceteris paribus, that is, the real GDP supplied. The short run aggregate supply curve, SRAS, is a curve that shows the quantity supplied at different, all goods and services at different price levels. Everything else the same. Hey, these kind of look like the same thing. Okay, here is a graph of the short-run aggregate supply curve. So as the price level goes up, the price level goes up, quantity supplied of real GDP goes up, so we're moving along the short-run aggregate supply curve. And so we need to ask, why would this happen at all? Because, if you do like a little mental experiment, if you increase all prices by 100%, right? Double them, everything doubles. Everything doubles. Well, that would mean that the opportunity cost of each good in terms of other goods I wish I could get better at writing on this. Of other goods has, maybe if I slow down, remained unchanged. So there would be no incentive to produce more or less than before. In other words, let's get a big one. If we were producing here, the aggregate supply curve would look like this. It'd be completely vertical. So that is why we have to explain why would it slope upward and to the right. Okay, so the textbook comes up with two possible explanations, and you'll see the textbook says workers. I also include employers. They go with the sticky wages explanation and the misconceptions of what the real wage is by workers. And also, I think misconceptions of employers about what the price of their product might be able to sell it for. So let's go with the sticky wages, and I'm going to stick directly here with the textbook because I don't like to think too hard about this, because thinking hard about it makes you less than happy about this explanation. But here we go. Wages are locked in for a few years due to labor contracts, or perhaps because of social conventions or perceived notions of fairness. Firms pay nominal wages. In other words, as they're going to say here soon, $30 an hour. Though they may pay nominal wages, they often decide how many workers to hire on real wages. And this is true, of us shopping too. In the end, it's what the real price of a good is. In other words, we don't consciously think of this, as I pointed out earlier in the semester, but we know what all other prices are. And so, if all prices are going up at the same rate, well, then we know there's been no real change in the price of goods. But if one price drops while all others remain the same, we know, yeah, wow, that's been a big drop in the price, the real price of it. So we make our decisions based upon the real prices, even as consumers, as do businesses when they hire workers. So now the textbook goes through this business that if the price level increases, and basically here is the formula they use for the price level. And remember that this is sort of related, if you will, to GDP. So nominal GDP equals the price level times Q, which is the real GDP. And so if you wanted to do real GDP, which is Q, it would equal the nominal GDP divided by the price level. And so, yeah, if you put the price level over here, so the price level times the real wage equals the nominal wage. And this is the same formula as here. So if the price level goes up right here and nominal wages are stuck, well, then real wages go down. And if the real price level goes down, which is, once again, right here, well, then real wages go up. And basically, now we're talking about supply. More individuals are willing to work, and current workers are willing to work more at higher real wages than at lower real wages, and vice versa. So, that's one thing I just don't understand here is they're sort of talking about the supply of labor. And if we might do this, let's come back here. Basically, we can draw a supply and demand curve. Well, we want to do supply. And so I'm going to put this as real wage. In other words, this formula here, I'm going to say is a real wage. And then I'm going to call the nominal wages like a block letter W over the price level, okay? And so we do have, so this is the real wage here, and here's the amount of labor. And so what they're saying is that the supply of labor like this is like this, and that if the real wage goes up, well then the number of workers would want to work more. So the workers are willing to work more at higher real wages and lower. I mean, that's what the supply of labor says. Okay, so this is a labor market here. So the real wage goes up, the quantity supplied of labor goes up. So in other words, they're saying we're moving along the supply curve. Quantity supplied, not supply, right? Quantity of labor supplied, right? Okay, why are we talking about the supply curve? I'm not sure. Because apparently it's the business firms. So now we're going to talk about firms will employ more workers the cheaper it is. So all of a sudden, without bringing the supply curve in, we have the labor market again, but only with the demand curve. So here's the real wage. And basically, the employer's demand curve slopes downward and to the right, right? And so basically what they're saying, if the real wage goes up, they'll hire less. And if the real wage goes down, they'll hire more. And this is a movement along too, right? So basically, if we go from a wage 1 and to a wage 2, this is the labor demanded at wage 2, and this is the quantity of labor demanded at wage 1. And I wish I could erase that, but I think I would. Let's just see. There we go. And let's go back further. Okay, let's go this as, I know this at wage 1, and this is the quantity demanded at wage 2, okay? And notice that we have a movement along if the wage goes down, or a movement back up if the real wage goes up. Okay, so that's all they're saying here. So real wage up, they will drop their demand for labor. Okay, let's just do this. So this one, real wage up, what will happen is a decrease in the quantity of labor. Real wage down, so basically the real wage comes down, well then they will increase it, okay? Okay, thus if wages are sticky, and that's what the whole thing was, so I'm not sure what we're doing with the supply curve, but really the sticky wage thing is all on the demand curve here. An increase in the price level, which pushes real wages down, will result in an increase in output. In other words, you hire more labor, you put it into the production function, and output goes up. So this is what an upward sloping short-run aggregate supply curve represents. As the price level rises, the quantity supplied of goods and services rises. So basically, let's see. So you have, it's this one right here. First, the price level increases. Second, because of calculating real wages decrease. Third, quantity demanded of labor demand, well, the demand doesn't increase, the quantity demanded increases, goes from LW1 to LW2. That's an increase in labor. So forth, there's an increase in labor utilized. And real GDP increases. So then what you get is this increase in real GDP with this increase in price level. And so if we draw that here, here's the price level, here's the real GDP. And so the real price level goes up. Real GDP goes up. Let's call this Q1, Q2, I guess price level 1, price level 2, and if we connect those two, what do we get? We get the short run aggregate supply curve, because workers' nominal wages don't change. They're stuck. They're just stuck. They're just stuck right here. So as the price level goes up and down, then the quantity employers purchase go up and down and use. And so there you go. I don't know what this all was about here with the supply of labor. It seems like the workers would work less if their real wages went down, and would work more if they went up. I don't know what this does here. What is it doing here? And indeed, this is why I don't want to think too hard about this. I have my doubts about it. But, there you go. Maybe. So the second thing is workers might have misconceptions about what their real wages were. In other words, they're not sure. And in fact, Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, by the way, and I know a lot of people pronounce it Keynes, which is wrong, Keynes. He really focused on this and said that workers have money illusion, that to them it's in other words, what they look at is their nominal wage, the amount of, say, dollars or pounds in their paycheck. That's what they're concerned about. What it will buy, they're not really too conscious about that. And so workers have a misconception about real wages. And basically, if workers think misperceive real wage changes, then a fall in the price level will bring about a decline in output, because a fall in the price level here is really hinting at the idea that nominal, come on, whoops, let's go back here. Nominal wages. See, these are falling, are part of the price level. Fall 2. But because price level, all prices are falling, basically the real wage has remained unchanged. Yet workers work less. So what we get is an upward sloping supply curve. In other words, labor goes down. The amount of labor going into production goes down. This is price level. Price level down. 1, 2, nominal wages fall, right? 3, workers work less. 4, real GDP falls. And you get this direct relation between price level and real GDP. And I guess we can call this the short-run aggregate supply curve, okay? So in response to a misperceived falling real wages, workers reduce the amount they're willing to work, and output drops. And vice versa. If wage rates are going up, but maybe not as fast, maybe a little slower than inflation, workers might think, oh God, we're doing well, even though their real wages are falling. And so they will work harder, even though their real wages are falling. So this is the money illusion, according to Keynes. So the money illusion occurs if workers see their nominal wages declining, then they will decide to work fewer hours and none at all. However, if the price level is also declining, then the real wage is not changing at all. If the workers realize this, they would not change their work effort. So the money illusion is used to explain why the short-run aggregate supply curve might have a positive slope to it. So that was the short-run aggregate supply curve. Now we go to the long-run aggregate supply curve. And the long-run aggregate supply curve represents, read this very closely, the output, in other words, the real GDP the economy produces when all economy-wide adjustments, that is in real wages and nominal wages, no more sticky wages, no more misperceptions, have taken place and workers do not have any relevant misperceptions. And if that's the case, we get this vertical aggregate supply curve, which I had talked about in an earlier slide. Let's go up to it. And indeed, when I said this is why we're doing it, in other words, right here in slide 3, I said, really, it seems like the supply curve should be completely vertical because the opportunity cost of the goods aren't changing. So anyway, here is the situation where, even though the price level is changing, the opportunity cost of all goods remains the same. So the price remains the same and output remains the same. And that's the long-run aggregate supply curve. And our textbook calls this Q sub n, the natural real GDP, or what I'll call it is the full employment level of real GDP. Okay, that's a full employment level. All right, so the natural real GDP and the natural unemployment. So basically, real GDP that is produced at the natural unemployment rate is the real GDP that is produced at the natural unemployment rate. I don't know, that just doesn't read right. The amount of GDP that is produced at the natural unemployment rate. Okay. The real GDP that is produced when the economy is in long-run equilibrium. Unemployment caused by frictional and structural factors. So there's no cyclical unemployment. We're at full employment, unemployment, basically. So that would be the natural level of GDP. Now here's a little addition by me. The rest of that previous was from the textbook. But basically what's being said here is that the vertical slope of the long-run aggregate supply curve is based on the fact that output in a nation, everything else the same, concerning religious, cultural, political, and institutional setting, is based on fully and efficiently utilizing at a given level of technology all resources available, land, labor, and capital. So I think basically we had this before. I don't know if I can do this little graphic, but we had the production, can't get it all in there. Process here. We had the inputs like land, labor, and capital here, and the output here. And now this is real GDP. And basically, we also could talk about the production possibilities frontier. Maybe we could produce capital goods or consumption goods, and these are goods, not money. And remember, we have the bought out production possibilities frontier. So any output on the production possibilities frontier would be full employment output. And so what we're saying is producing here on the frontier is the same as price level, real GDP. And this is what we call full employment output. We're producing on the frontier. And we have a vertical long-run aggregate supply curve, okay? And this land, labor, and capital, these are the inputs right here, obviously, okay? So, now, note that production in the long run depends upon the level of technology. Oh, I didn't note that over here. I should have said at a given level of technology. At the efficient use of our natural resources, land, at efficient use of labor, at efficient use of capital. So everything is being produced just right. We're on the production possibilities frontier. But notice that back in this one, that the inputs do not include price levels. So output does not depend upon the price level. No price level as an input, okay? So the amount we can produce just depends upon our real inputs, not the price level. And basically, that is what the vertical long-run aggregate supply tells us, is that, if we fully employ and efficiently employ our inputs, land, labor, and capital, the price level can change, and it will not change that full employment level. And basically, vertical lines just say that whatever is measured on the right here, so this vertical line is basically saying whatever is measured on this horizontal axis is independent of what's on the vertical axis here. So how much is being produced is completely independent from the price level. That's what the long-run aggregate supply curve is telling us, okay? And finally, I pulled this from some other place on the internet. Our textbook calls Y hat here Q sub n. That's a full employment level of output right there. And basically, this was part of the question right here, what we're saying. So P, this is the actual price level, or maybe I should say these P's represent actual price level. This one represents the expected price level. And notice there are three conditions. The actual really existing price level could be less than the expected price level. That's case number one. Case number two could be that the actual price level exactly equals the expected price level. And case number three is that the actual price level is greater than the expected price level. So basically, what's happening here is that people are expecting a given price level. Let's just say it's right here, okay? That is the expected price level. And so the intersection, and this Y is really the short run aggregate supply curve. So where it intersects the long run aggregate supply curve, that tells us what businesses, workers, and consumers expect the price level to be in the coming year or so. Okay, and they make their decisions on that as far as how much to work, how much to buy, how much to produce. Now for businesses, if the actual price level is below the expected price level, we'll get this equation will explain it. So here is the natural level right here, and the equation is plus alpha, some constant, P minus the expected price level. So if the expected price level right here is greater than the price level, in other words, maybe in case 1, the PE equals 100, but P is equal to 80, so you're going to get y hat plus alpha 80 minus 100, which equals y hat plus alpha minus 20. So obviously y, and that'll be y. So y will end up being down here, let's just call it y1. In other words, at this price level, this is the amount business firms are willing to produce. Now, in case 2, let's just do this. We have P, the expected price level, equals 100, and the actual price level equals 100. So when we have y equals y hat plus alpha 100 minus 100, we get y equals y hat plus alpha times 0. So here we actually get our full employment level right here. That's it. So now we're at case 3, and if the expected price level remains at 100, but now the actual price level, maybe you should say this is 3, 2, 1, then actual GDP level will equal y hat, the full employment output, plus alpha times, P3 is going to be the actual 120. So it's going to be 120 minus 100. So people's expectations are broken below and above, and that's what causes them to produce more or less. This is called the adaptive expectation, or a little bit further, rational expectation model. So y is going to equal y hat plus alpha times 20. So obviously y3 is going to be right here. And that's going to be connected to P3, okay? And so when we put these together, we get an upward sloping short-run aggregate supply curve because of this expectations model. And this is part of what we're going to call adaptive expectations. So adaptive expectations can do a nice job explaining upward slope of the short-run aggregate supply curve. And that does it for the long-run and short-run aggregate supply curve. And just before I leave this, let's just make sure that we know that this intersection is the expected price level. It doesn't necessarily mean that this is the equilibrium level. The only way it would be equilibrium is if indeed the aggregate demand curve came right through here. And let's call this the aggregate demand in case 2. And really how we get to this point is this would be the aggregate demand in the third situation, and this would be the aggregate demand in the first. So in other words, we would have a short-run equilibrium here, though it would be not a stable equilibrium. Here we have a short-run and a long-run equilibrium. This is a stable equilibrium. Here we have a short-run equilibrium, but not a long-run equilibrium, so that's not stable. Okay, let's just call it quits there and move on to the next question. So I'm going to stop the recording here. And we'll see what we can do.